Hello everyone, myself Mahesh Shetty. Dear friends, now I am going to speak on another important variable of economics related to the same topic, that is inflation. It is inflationary gap. This concept was propounded by or developed by a very modern economist, J.M. Keynes of England, John Maynard Keynes. He published a pamphlet, that is how to pay for the war. If you look at the first slide, you will come across. See, in his pamphlet how to pay for the war, published in 1940, Keynes explained the concept of inflationary gap. It differs from his view on inflation given in his general theory. General theory means his book published in the year 1936, the general theory of employment, interest and money. In the general theory, he started with the underemployment equilibrium, but in how to pay for the war, he began with the situation of full employment in the economy. Here, this concept of inflation gap, he has started to explain this concept with full employment, not inflation, full employment. In the earlier cases, in general theory, he had explained under the case of underemployment, but here it is full employment. He defined an inflation gap as an excess of planned expenditure over the available output at pre-inflation or base prices. It means that when economy makes more and more of expenses than the required level of output, it makes the economy to face inflation. It means that when an economy or any government makes more and more of expenditure than the required, certainly it leads the economy to face inflation. According to Lipsey, he pointed out here that, see here, look at the slide, the inflationary gap is the amount by which aggregate expenditure would exceed aggregate output at the full employment level of income. It means that he says that at the full employment level of output or income, when aggregate expenditure exceeds over aggregate output. To reach aggregate output level, when government makes more of expenses, then it may lead to inflation in the economy. The classical economists explained inflation as mainly due to increase in the quantity of money given the level of full employment. You can easily understand, my dear friends, this inflation gap with the help of a diagram here. See, the OX axis here, this horizontal axis measures the income or output level, and this vertical axis measures the expenditure. Here the curve, which has drawn at a very 45-degree angle from the origin, implies aggregate supply, and the curve which is drawn from this vertical axis is aggregate demand, that is C plus I plus G. Here C means consumption expenditure, I means investment expenditure, and G means governmental expenditure. Altogether it becomes aggregate demand. Here the arrow mark is showing about inflationary gap from point A to point B. How this gap appears in the economy? As I pointed out in the beginning itself, Keynes, he had explained the concept with full employment stage. See, when the economy reaches its full employment level, and after reaching the full employment level, suppose economy makes more and more of expenditure, then certainly it leads to inflation. See here, when output reaches to YF level, YF means output to full employment level. Here the expenditure made by the government is to A point. This AYF is the expenses of the government, but to get equilibrium, this AD curve is supposed to intersect at point B, not at point E here, because at point B the economy has reached its full employment level. If suppose it intersect at point B, there would not be any kind of inflationary gap or inflation, because the amount spent, it is equal to the total amount of output. See, when the curve goes beyond this level, when it means that when supply of commodity takes place from YF to YF1, here the aggregate demand curve intersects the aggregate supply curve. Here this point is unattainable point, my dear friends, because here aggregate supply will not reach at this level, because only at this level the economy has already reached its full employment level. There is no such points at this level, because the supply of commodity will stop by itself, because this is the stage where the economy reaches its full employment level. So when economy is unable to reach or make its supply to this level, it makes a gap between expenditure and output. Here see, B to E is unattainable supply, or it cannot possible to make any kind of output by the economy, since it has already reached the full employment level. Only up to this amount of point, only an economy can produce its goods. See, from this to this, from B to point A, or from point A to point B, a gap being appeared with respect to an excess of government expenditure, that is nothing but an excess of demand, so that inflation gap being taken place. So the overall idea behind this concept is, when government makes more and more of expenditure or expenses than required level of output, certainly that extra expense leads to the economy to face inflation. This is what we had gap from point A to point B, since it is called as inflationary gap. I hope you understood the concept very well, why this inflation gap takes place, how. I repeat, this inflation gap takes place when government expenditure becomes more than the total amount of output produced. Thank you very much for your kind listening.